Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a barrel-aged Russian Imperial Stout. Been a long time since I've had a beer from this brewer. This is Gigantic Brewing Company. They're based in Portland, Oregon. And this is a series of the same beer that they have put in different barrels. This specific beer is called Most Premium Russian Imperial Stout. And the specific one I'm starting with today is a Scotch barrel-aged version. This specific beer clocks in at 12% ABV. So this is not dissimilar to the perennial artisan ales Abraxas Trio I got from Tavour, where it's the same beer, but they changed one thing about it to make it different. And then you get to taste them and kind of see what that subtle change makes to the entire beer drinking experience. I think that that's something really cool, and it keeps it interesting, it keeps it fresh, but it truly goes to show you just how critical every little decision and every little aspect of the brewing process and aging process can drastically alter a beer. So we've got the same beer with the same ingredients list. The only thing different about these are the barrels. This is the Scotch barrel version. These are all the 2021 release. I think I have 4, maybe 5 different versions of the same beer. I decided to start with Scotch barrels because I absolutely love Scotch, specifically Islay. And as I was planning for this one, today, as I picked up, came across my Tavour feed. There's a brewer that has an IPA collection of 4 IPAs, all the same, but they altered the yeast in all of them. An often overlooked ingredient, but without which we have no beer. And it's one of the things that makes the most drastic difference in how the beer carbonates, how it tastes, how the aromas come through. So this is such a cool thing. I love that brewers are experimenting and playing around with things, and like, you've got a good base beer, let's tweak this, tweak that, see what makes it different. I'm sure it's fun for them, and it's just as fun for me. So, in terms of label art, this has what looks like, honestly, I don't know how to describe it, maybe a cricket or a praying mantis in a traditional kind of Russian imperial garb, holding his goblet of beer. So pretty cool label art on the top. It's just got a little paper thing on the side here. That'll come off no problem. So we'll get our cap and we'll open that. And we will pour this right into our trusty stout glass. Oh, thick, 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 very dark, very thick. I'm going to give it some good aggression here. I'm trying to be as aggressive as I can on the pour to give it a chance to do ahead. This one seems like it might be pretty high in terms of carbonation. Yeah, it is. Oh, wow. That aroma is pungent coming off of this beer. Pungent, pungent, pungent. Pitch black, as expected. This is a Russian Imperial Stout, 12% ABV. So if I had not been very aggressive with that pour, I don't think it would have even had a chance to get a little pad or cling on the sides. But it's very active in terms of carbonation. I'm looking at the top. It is tiny, fine little bubbles, but they're coming up very quickly and kind of hitting it and collapsing it from the bottom. So it is what it is. Head and the retention on this one, not as great as most stouts. But it's poured from a bottle into a glass in my house. It is what it is. I expect this is still going to be fantastic. So let's get right up over it for a proper sniff. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. That's a really nice combination of aromas blending together. So the Scotch barrel comes through very, very clearly. I don't know which specific Scotch they used for the barrel for this, but I know it's Scotch barrel aged. Aside from the Scotch coming through, it's a classic Russian Imperial Stout. Tons of deeply, deeply roasted malt coming through on the nose and bits of char. It's coming through very strongly. Obviously, it's pitch black. It's 12%. I expect this to be a very big, bold beer indeed. So, head, I just have a tiny pad floating and a little cling on the sides. That is what it is, but it looks great. It smells great. Let's jump right in and see what this Scotch barrel version is all about. Oh, oh, wow. That is absolutely delicious. There's a ton of different flavors happening here. A lot of what I expected, some that I did not expect at all, and all of which are absolutely delicious. So, first thing, before we get to the flavor profile, we're going to talk texture, body and mouthfeel. The body on this beer, I would say, is really just medium. It does not feel super heavy. It's 12%. I'm very surprised by that. So in the grand scheme of things, for a 12% Russian Imperial, it's definitely on the lower end of the spectrum, kind of sitting in the low average range in terms of the weight. It doesn't feel heavy. Some may view that as a positive, but it's definitely a deviation from the norm for the style in this ABV range. For the mouthfeel, this is not one that gets very creamy, nor does it get foamy, nor does it get silky when you agitate around the palate, but you can really feel just how thick and resistant this beer is. The mouthfeel is quite resistant. It is quite thick. That I did expect, and that it did deliver. So, flavor profile. As soon as you swallow, you're hit in tandem with deeply, richly roasted malts. They come rushing at you in tandem with that Scotch barrel. It tastes distinctly of Scotch with this nice underpinning of char. It actually does put me in mind a little bit of drinking an Islay Scotch, which uses smoked peat malts that have been smoked. Peat they light, so it's smoked by peat. Heavily peated malts for the Islay Scotches. And this puts me in mind a little bit of that flavor profile, but I need to be careful to not suggest that this tastes smoky. It does not at all. Just deeply, deeply roasted malts, very earthy, very charry, very rich, and then a classic Scotch backbone to it. What I did not expect to come through on this beer that I got a lot of, and it was kind of all over the board, is right behind that Scotch barrel and that deep, rich roasted malt character came a rush of really bright, fruity flavors. And this is another one of these beers. I did one 4, 5, 6, 7 reviews ago. I don't recall, but it's got this rush of this bright, fresh cherry flavor that kind of rushes forward. And it's a mix of kind of normal cherry, whatever, a Bing cherry, and also some kind of tart cherries. So there's this bright, fruity accent that comes through, and there is this slight tartness to it. And that actually kind of hovers around for a few seconds and settles back down. And then that kind of morphs into these more like floral kind of qualities into it. And all the while, you're still getting this intense roast, intense char, and intense forward presence of this Scotch barrel. It's absolutely delicious. There is a ton of complexity to this, a ton of different interwebbings of flavors, and wow, what a treat. So, we're going to jump back in, sip number 2, let everything re-intensify, make sure I didn't miss anything, then we're going to talk about the finish. This is a fantastic beer. Roast, char, Scotch. Now I'm starting to get these bright cherry-like flavors. Bing and tart. There's a little tartness. That's hovering. Actually, on second sip, it's elongating everything. It's re-intensifying. This is a thick beer. It does coat the palate. Now it's starting to settle down, and now it's taking on these more floral accents. So there's still this big intensity of roastiness, earthiness, char underneath. The Scotch sitting right there with it. And now there's just these currents of kind of floral qualities that just float in and out. Very, very big, bold, pungent flavors. Very, very delicious. So the finish on this one. As you might expect, it is quite long. This is a Scotch barrel-aged 12% Russian Imperial Stout with a lot of pungency of flavor. So yes, and it's also quite thick and viscous, and it does coat the palate. So it is really letting these flavors linger and stick all over. And really, what you're left with on the end of the finish, that's not dry. It is very big, very wet, very round all the way to the end, is this big undercurrent of the roasty edge of the malts, that char, and just kind of more subtle, lingering bits of the Scotch barrel. So on the end of it, the underpinning of the malt bill, the actual base of the beer style, does take more center stage on the end of the finish than the barrel does. The barrel's still there and it's still nice and it still tastes absolutely as fantastic as it did on first sip, but it is dominated by that earthy, rich, charry, kind of malt, roasty character on the back. Absolutely fantastic. This is a delicious beer. I cannot wait to try the other variants, but I'm going to take my sweet time, sip on this one, count my scores. When we come back, we will get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Gigantic Brewing Company's most premium Russian Imperial Stout, the Scotch barrel-aged version. All 2021 releases on these various versions of this beer I'll be trying. 12% ABV on this. Gigantic Brewing is based in Portland, Oregon. So starting with the aroma, as you would expect from a barrel-aged 12% Russian Imperial, the aroma was absolutely huge on this beer. It smelled exactly as I expected. Tons of roast, tons of underlying roastiness from the malt bill, little edge of char. The Scotch spoke very clearly, absolutely pungent with its intensity. The aroma gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, this was an absolutely delicious beer. It was clear that it was a classic, true to the style Russian Imperial Stout done very, very well indeed. And then the added bonus was the Scotch barrel in which they aged it. I don't know what kind of Scotch it was, but it absolutely was fantastic. And there were these other kind of fruity accents that popped up and floral accents on the finish that I really didn't expect, that were a very pleasant surprise. It was very complex with its flavor profile and was absolutely fantastic. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body, this was one of the categories that surprised me a bit. 12%, that's, you know, a pretty high ABV on any beer. Barrel-aged Russian Imperial Stout aside, it was really just the low end of average. It didn't have the weight, it didn't have the presence for a beer of this style in that ABV range, but it wasn't horrible. Body gets a 4 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, mouthfeel overall was very, very nice. It had a definite good amount of resistance, a decent bit of viscosity as well. It did not get creamy, it did not get silky, it did not get foamy, but you could feel that resistance, and it felt pretty close to what I expected. It was definitely top tier for sure, only missed the mark by 1. Mouthfeel gets a 9 out of 10. For the finish on this beer was really, really great. Very long, as you would expect for a beer with that kind of pungency of flavor, and there's barrel aging on top of it. So that underlying char and that underlying whisper of Scotch on the back end, that was kind of the one thing that just kept it from top tier status, I think, was that the Scotch barrel didn't last quite as long to keep pushing it out. But again, I'm being very nitpicky. It only missed the mark by a hair. Finish gets a 9 out of 10. Head and retention. This was the category that really, it is what it is. Poured at home. It did not do a great job. It barely attempted to form a head. It really didn't stick around for any significant amount of time. This was really not very great at all. Head and retention gets a 2 out of 10. Appearance, this was textbook for the style, gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was exceptional. All the different malts that they used, whatever hops that they used, and the barrel and the amount of time that they did it, maybe just based on the finish alone, I would have said, I'll leave it in the barrel just a little bit longer. But, that's neither here nor there. You never really know if that actually makes a difference. But for the ingredients in this beer, the water, the malt, the hops, the yeast, they chose that very, very well. Excellent, excellent choice of malts. The blend of them, the amount of them, I really, really enjoyed it. The yeast was the right strain. Whatever hops they used played their part. Absolutely fantastic balance. And yes, in the flavor profile, outside of the finish, the barrel played its part and it all had equal voice. So really, really nice balance on this beer. Balance gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, subjectively, I loved it. This was a great Russian Imperial Stout. That Scotch barrel aging was just an added bonus. 10 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. Okay, so this one lost some pretty good points in head and retention and in the body. and just a couple in a few other categories. That is, you know, it is what it is texturally and in terms of the head, but we're pouring it home, and in the grand scheme of things, you know, it had a nice thick mouthfeel. It may not have been quite as weighty as I expected, and the head may not have formed quite as well as I expected, but everything else it did so well that I didn't want to dock too many points here, because I do think that this is an absolutely top tier Russian Imperial Stout. Gigantic did a fantastic job. The Scotch barrel was just an absolute treat. I only docked 1 point here. Example of the style gets a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Gigantic Brewing Company's most premium Russian Imperial Stout 2021 release Scotch barrel aged version to an 83 out of 100. So definitely well above average beer. I know I review a lot of beers that get into the 90s, 83. You may be thinking, meh, but let's just sit back for a minute. Had the head formed beautifully like it were pulled from a tap, let's say it got a 10, that's 8 more points right there. It's already into the 90s. Had the body been a little heavier, same thing. And just a couple points in a couple of the categories. So the head and retention and the body really did weigh the score down, but it is what it is. I have to rank it how I experienced it. It could be different for you in your climate, your atmosphere, how quickly you open the beer, what glass you use, the temperature. All of these things play a part. So for my money, absolute top tier Russian Imperial Stout. 83 is still well above average. I scored it how I experienced it, but this is one I highly recommend. If you like barrel-aged stouts, barrel-aged beers, Russian Imperials in particular, this kind of line that Gigantic is doing absolutely fantastic. If this is any indication what the rest are like, I cannot wait to sample the last 3 or 4 of these that I have. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on the notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.